CCS 3900. Let's do 3900. What's up, people? I didn't share a whit. Not a thing. Probably because I'm just not in the best today. What's up, guys? What's up, guys? We're going to take a trip down memory lane here. We need to play a clip of good old Mitch McConnell that not too many people probably have seen. Good stuff, good stuff, good stuff. All right, let's rip. Share while the music's playing, right? Share while the music's playing. Oh, this one died yesterday. Oh, it's so low. Kick it up. What legacy? Legacy of the guy being an asshole. Oh, that's live. And, come say goodbye if you leave before. Of course, nothing but kisses. Hopefully he's in a better mood. Praise God, right? Did I really do that? I did. You don't have to. Doesn't matter. It's too late. It doesn't matter. It's cool. Way too much anyway. Wait. All right, welcome to another episode of Between the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I'm your host, Rich Barris, the People's Pundit. Don't forget to like the videos if you like them, to share them far and wide. All right, let's get into it. So, and then there were none. With RFK being confirmed by the Senate as the Health and Human Services Secretary, we now have Trump's full cabinet confirmed after Tulsi Gabbard was, of course, about 20 hours ago, confirmed as the next director of national intelligence, which I believe she is the 8th, if not the 9th. I believe she's the 8th director of the Office of National Intelligence. Okay. And that's great. And that's a huge win for MAGA. That's a huge win for the president. He actually, after being stymied more than any president in recent ever, I think, in his first term, he steamrolled the opposition and the Democrats getting his cabinet in. His biggest opponents, in fact, were from his own party, all right, which controls the U.S. Senate. His own party, which betrays and backstabs him and his voters, either publicly or privately, almost on a daily basis, and certainly on the big things. I thought from the beginning that Gabbard was going to be the hardest to get through. Susan Collins getting on board was absolutely huge. It was. She is the, how can we put it? She is the mother of the director of the Office of National Intelligence. She believed, right or wrong, that intelligence was not being disseminated correctly, was not being shared enough. All right. And what was going on, unfortunately, to remedy, because that's almost undeniably true if you believe the official 9/11 story. All right. But to me, I never did. I understood the problems. If you're in the military, maybe you get it. Or if you're in that field, you get it. There are certainly problems of information sharing. There is a less than healthy competition between agencies, between um, uh, service branches, et cetera, et cetera. And she wanted more cooperation. That unfortunately has led to more people having access to top secret information or extremely sensitive information or beyond top secret. And there is such a thing. And that has led to people like Bradley Manning having access to incredibly sensitive stuff that they then leak, and worse, right? And worse. And these low level people that you once had the impression only so and so gets to see that is in truth, it's not the case. The New Jersey National Guardsman, for instance, right? He, crosses Biden, they go on a manhunt for him. But nevertheless, a lot of people wondered, how did he get that information? Well, that's how. And the Office of National Intelligence is supposed to be standing above the entire community, the intelligence community, and like a bottleneck, getting all the information run through it, and that they would be coordinating that sharing in a more efficient and productive manner. Now, since then, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, it's a totally different Between the Numbers episode, but since then, there's been a number of terror attacks that have not been stopped, and there's no way you can blame information sharing. The problem fundamentally with our intelligence community is not one of, oh, they didn't have enough information or they don't have enough tools or this. They're doing other things. They're way off there. The biggest problem with these agencies, these bureaus, the alphabets, etc., the biggest problem is that they have lost way of their mission. They are no longer on mission, and they are doing other things, which include trying to attack, imprison, oppose political opponents they don't like Donald Trump, who, God forbid, would really attempt to shrink government. They'll call themselves, many of them call themselves Republicans, but only in the fake sense of what a Republican is, like the Bush era Republican or the Herbert Walker Bush to W. Bush era, a Republican, which doesn't ever really intend to cut the size and scope of government. And in fact, one of them, younger, made government bigger than it's ever been and gave them police powers that they never were intended to have. And he started the Department of Homeland Security, for crying out loud. Anyway, the Tsarnaev brothers got through. They got in the country, came in with crazy old mom. The Russians, big bad boogeymen over in Russia. Yeah, Vladimir Putin, the guy, the shirtless monster who gives us all night terrors when we're trying to sleep. Yeah, that guy. He told us all about them and that they were coming in, and our intelligence community did nothing about it. They then exploded 2 pressure cooker bombs at the Boston Marathon and killed and maimed a bunch of people. All right. And I could go on and on. San Bernardino, the Pulse nightclub shooter. You got his daddy sitting behind Hillary Clinton during campaign events in Florida. He goes up to shoot a bunch of gay people in a nightclub because he's a crazy Muslim extremist. Yada, yada, yada. All right. So here we have somebody who thinks very differently, becoming the head of the director of national intelligence, as the next director of national intelligence. And I feel like the D&I matters more a little bit because I thought she would be harder. So to me, in my mind, it's a little bit more significant. Now, we can go all through, and we will in the coming days talk about it. But since he'll probably fall down the stairs again this week or next week, or at least there's a strong possibility he may fall down a flight of steps like he did last week, leaving the Capitol building. You probably didn't hear about that. He could be gone tomorrow. So let's talk about, while he still remains today's news, the end of Mitch McConnell's legacy, if he ever had one, with the confirmation of this cabinet. He stabbed his own voters, the American public, his party, and the president in the back numerous times during this process. He's a backstabbing piece of you-know-what when it came to Pete Hegseth, and on and on. Now, all the way leading to these last 2 very tough confirmation votes for the president in his White House. And that, of course, was RFK and Tulsi Gabbard, both of whom Mitch McConnell voted against. So, in memory of McConnell, who could, I'm not being mean. The guy strokes out routinely on camera. They've been hiding him away because we're all supposed to be told, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but we're all being told this is like the remnants of his polio as a child or something come back to haunt him. All right, give me a break, dude. All right, maybe that's why you fell down the stairs, but you're old. and you are doing what happens to all of us. God, God forbid, God, it's sad, but it is the truth. And instead of going home and deciding to spend what time he has left, like with his grandchildren or something, he intends to pull a John McCain. He's such a vindictive, bought and sold, bought and paid for, piece of trash, that he's going to spend the rest of the moments that God has given him on this glorious earth to be a scumbag till the end. All right. And it's a shame too, is there wasn't always this form of Mitch McConnell. Now, some things he always was a neocon, for instance. Always. Mitch McConnell was always a neocon. But he has turned into not just like a political betrayer. And I say this because let's not forget our Dante here, folks. All right. Let's not forget our Dante. The great work of Dante. All right. The worst circle of hell is reserved for whom? Right. So obviously, I'm not wishing a literal hell on the guy. What I'm saying is, even throughout our humanities, right, our art, our history, our literature, we have always held this place at the bottom of the barrel for people who betray those they owe them, especially those they owe the most to. Brutus, Cassius, they'd be nothing without the great Caesar, right? Mitch McConnell would be nothing if not for the voters that he lied to year in and year out. And people always ask me, how does this guy get reelected, right? And in an effort to like review the making of his legacy, we'll tell that little story, all right? Because it's a story that goes in contrast to the one that Mitch wanted everyone to believe many, many, many years ago. Okay. And we're going to wind up skipping through all this stuff. And I have some marks where I want to stop and have him state something. Now, to you is going to be ludicrous at this point. I mean, you're gonna listen to it and you're gonna say, somebody once said that? Somebody once actually believed that? And once upon a time, I would submit to you that they didn't. But once upon a time, they could tell you this lie and you would believe it because who knew? Who knows? Right? Maybe your common sense and your gut would tell you this is obviously a big load of crap. But back then, it was a serious argument. But before we do, let's take a flashback to when Tucker was still on Fox News. Because let's paint the picture of the man and who he really is. This is not a matter of like, oh, do you disagree with a policy? Because these politicians always try to do this. They always try to paint this as some kind of question, conflict with their ideology, their belief systems, or a conflict with ethics or morality or character, right? Of course, them being the judge, jury, and executioners of like, your character and the morality of you holding a certain position, all right? But it's all a lie. It's all a charade. It's a facade, whatever you want to call it. It's a load of crap. It always has been. And I just have no intention of ever pretending. Like, there's at least one thing that Trump has given us. If let's say you don't like Donald Trump, you got to give him credit for this. We can now drop all of the charades. We don't have to go through this anymore. We don't have to let them pretend like these are their real excuses and these are the real motives for them doing something. They're full of crap. They've always been full of crap. You're just now privy to what their real motives and intentions are. At least you're lucky enough to live in a time where those are discoverable. The media used to take everyone's word for it. People would take their word for it. And we would move on. And the joke was on you. The public, the voter. The joke was on you. I don't really want to go back to that. Do you? So at the very least, you can thank Donald Trump for that. But here's one of Tucker Carlson's. It is. He's getting close to being fired at this point. But he did a segment which was really a human interest story. But this human interest story, God, my tag is itching me. Excuse me. This human interest story is so indicative of who Mitch McConnell is as a man, as a person. This is a man who hides a scumbag political operative that everyone thinks is the lowest form of human life in the hills of Kentucky where he hides until Mitch McConnell needs somebody smeared or somebody destroyed or somebody ruined or stories planted or evidence planted or whatever it may be, or a bag of cash transported. Then he calls him out, but he'll never be seen with this guy again in public. He once was, until everyone found out some of the very dirty things that he has done. So now on Mitch's dime, which is really, of course, your dime, right? And dimes of donors that he funnels through PACs, which he once argued should not be, illegal. On your dime, he tucks this guy away and he brings him out to carry out the most disgusting, I don't even know the word for it. Their job, he's not a cleaner. It's not a cleaner because it's not like there's something to clean up. He does this. He initiates this stuff. Let's call it a non-literal hit. All right. And Tucker brought one up once to show everybody who the real Mitch McConnell was. And this was such a good piece. So let's listen to Tucker. Only less than 2 minutes. Let's blaze along and listen to who the real Mitch McConnell. And mind you, this is already an old man. Okay? An old man who already he's sitting at the top of the throne. To be tiny and vindictive, well, there's so much wrong with the country that he should be addressing, that he should be fixing, right? We're a country being managed on the decline right now. And this is where the leader of the Senate is spending his time.
If you don't live in D.C., you probably haven't heard the name, but Tim Eunice is a Republican event planner in Washington. For 25 years, he helped organize appearances for Senator Bob Dole and his wife, Senator Elizabeth Dole. He was close to the family. When Bob Dole died last week, Eunice was the obvious choice to manage the funeral and the memorial service, and he would have done that if Mitch McConnell hadn't gotten personally involved. Now, technically, Mitch McConnell is the Republican leader of the United States Senate, but in real life, and everyone in Washington knows this, on the issues that matter, Mitch McConnell is an instrument of the left. McConnell knew that Tim Eunice had helped organize Donald Trump's political rally in Washington this
week. That political rally that obviously went so horribly wrong, right? But in any event, let me just say this real quick before we move on. He said that everybody in Washington knows that Mitch McConnell is an instrument of the left. I submit that, in fact, everybody now knows Mitch McConnell is an instrument of the left. I looked back, and the last time we polled Mitch McConnell's favorability, he was by far the most unpopular politician in the country, all right, with almost 2/3 of the public having a unfavorable opinion of him. And ironically enough, or not even, it's not even ironic, it's just very appropriate. There were more Democrats than Republicans who had a strongly favorable view of Mitch McConnell. All right. So on the Likert scale, folks, the most liked you can tell a pollster you have, the best image for somebody that you can tell a pollster you have, was outnumbered by Democrats for Mitch McConnell than it was for Republicans. And then the numbers were as follows. 9% of Democrats said they had a very favorable, not strongly, sorry, excuse me, I misspoke, a very favorable view of Mitch McConnell, where only, and it's kind of less, I just am rounding up, 6% of Republicans had a very favorable opinion of Mitch McConnell. When you looked at strongly and regular favorability, Democrats actually had a better image of Mitch McConnell than Republicans. Now, that's not always like that. I went back and I checked, and it would vary. Mitch McConnell is typically more liked by Republicans than anyone else. But in that last survey, he wasn't. And on multiple occasions over the years, I looked back, it was like every other month, there would be at least more Democrats who had a very favorable opinion of him. Right. But by far, again, even when Nancy Pelosi, I went back to when Pelosi was still speaker. Even when Nancy Pelosi was still the speaker, Mitch McConnell was the most hated. And that goes throughout the toward the end of the first Trump administration. All right, so let's go back to this and let's listen to Tucker's story, because I feel like Obviously, more Democrats like him because they know like you would like Chuck Schumer if you're a Republican, you would like Chuck Schumer if he constantly betrayed Democrats and worked with Republicans to screw over his own voter. Of course you would. And there would be more of you that say that you have a very favorable opinion of Chuck Schumer than you do than his own party would. Of course, that would never happen. This is all ridiculous hypothetical because Democrats don't screw their own voters the way that Mitch McConnell does.
It's January. Now, there's nothing illegal or immoral about doing that. If anything is constitutionally protected behavior, it's organizing a political rally. It's why we have the Bill of Rights. But the partisan lunatics on the January 6th committee don't acknowledge the Bill of Rights, and they objected to this. And then Mitch McConnell aggressively took their side, as he has from the very beginning. So McConnell then convinced the Dole family to cancel Tim Eunice's contract and disinvite him from the funeral. Then McConnell made sure the story made the New York Times. And when he did that, he knew perfectly well that a piece like this would completely destroy Tim Eunice's life, which unfortunately it definitely will.
All right, let me just stop right there. And so you understand what happened here. All right. He had always planned events for the Dole family. He knew Bob Dole very well. This is like telling somebody or engineering a disinvitation of a person who wants to go to the funeral for one of their good lifelong friends. And that is the case here. All right. Why? What was the sin he committed? He put together an event for Donald Trump in D.C. And it's funny because this is around the moment where McConnell turns on Trump. And we're going to look at why he said he did. Okay. And we're going to look at some of the statements he had made in the past. So anytime it benefits Mitch McConnell, he changes his position on an issue, and it's been like that for many, many years. He could oppose it one day, but the next day, if it benefits him, he will be all over that like white on rice, all right? So this is a man who is so vindictive, he made sure that somebody could not go to his friend's funeral. And by the way, that is a textbook McConnell hit piece. He'll get Jay to make sure that it goes into the Washington Post or the New York Times. In this case, Politico is one of the McConnell team's favorite places to go to leak something against his own people, to damage them, hurt them, or in this case, destroy them. This is an attempt to destroy someone's life. This is not just you can't plan the funeral for Bob Dole. It's worse than that. You can't even go. And by the way, anyone who calls him is going to go on my blacklist. So this man's life, his business, his reputation, his social status and standing in the community is ruined by Mitch McConnell because of his ties to Trump. It's that simple.
It will mean no more corporate clients, no more business, no more income for Tim Eunice.
They're calling me right now. You see
So
that?
even by Mitch McConnell's usual standards of viciousness, and in Washington, he's known as the nastiest old woman in town. This was an incredibly cruel thing to do. It was crushing the weak on behalf of the strong, and for no real reason, simply because he could. He doesn't like Trump.
Yeah, I hated having to put that stuff on the screen, but I wanted you to hear what he said before I took it down. Just because he could, and he doesn't like Trump. Now, Mitch McConnell has never liked Donald Trump. Mitch McConnell is a political creature, the worst political scum you will ever meet. He has always been this way. Now, there are some issues that a younger Mitch McConnell had championed and had spoken about openly and plainly as if it's common knowledge. And now, because he wants to run with the crowd, he'll disavow those very positions and disavow you if you take those positions, which is in fact what happened here with Donald Trump. He thought he saw an opportunity to destroy Trump once and for all with January 6th. All right. He even jumped on the election fraud claims are nonsense bandwagon. This is a man who has been fact-checked by Snopes multiple times for things that he has said for instance, and where is it? I know I pulled it up. Yep. No, that's another one. That's oh my God, there's so many. Okay, there's another one. I guess I got it. Anyway, in 2018, when his buddy lost a race, in North Carolina, they claimed that it was voter fraud. Mitch McConnell was all on board for it. He was fact-checked by Snopes. He was fact-checked by PolitiFact. And I'm not saying these are reputable institutions. I'm just saying he was easily in the same position that Trump was after 2020. But he forgot about all of that after 2020, and he decided to talk and sound like a writer at Politico or something. All right. And before we go back to that original thing, what I really want to show you, because it's kind of it's not a long clip. I'm going to skip over some stuff. But I want you to see something, because I would argue it's more than just political opportunism. I would argue that almost anything a politician does that you find to be confusing, why would he do this? How could he or she take these positions? He was just taking a completely different position a week ago or yesterday, or even if it's a gradual overtime evolution. It is almost never the case, folks, almost never the case that it's come from some deep reflection and thought on the topic or the issue. It is almost always about money. All right, here is a flashback. All right, 1993, you have then obviously Senator Mitch McConnell, and he's getting up to filibuster campaign finance reform. And actually, no, I'm sorry, it's 98. He's getting up to filibuster, and one of the co-sponsors of the bill is one of his colleagues. The other one, he now sits in the same pool with John McCain. But he gets up and he filibusters it. And I want you to hear something. And I'm going to stop and interrupt here and there to few things are just wrong. They're just incorrect. They're misleading. And I'm just going to stop it and fill it in. But I want you to listen to the arguments he makes against campaign finance reform. They're absolutely incredible.
Yeah. The nub of the issue, of course, is how we look at the cash contribution. It's been interesting to listen to some of the speeches on the other side that equate money with evil in politics. It seems to me that in a capitalistic society like ours, money is not necessarily evil. And in politics, provided it's limited and disclosed, it seems to me it's not evil at all.
Limited,
Robert Samuelson,
disclosed,
who is one of my favorite writers, in Newsweek last summer.
Newsweek,
when we were earlier waltzing around.
Another McConnell favorite.
He had a fascinating column, which appeared, as I said, in Newsweek, July 13th, 1987.
Okay, so it is older than that. Let me just posit that, that's his buddy. I can almost guarantee you that he wrote this column so Mitch McConnell could go then and argue this.
And the headline was the campaign reform fraud. And the subheadline was, money is a necessary evil in politics. Spending limits would create greater evils.
I know it's so hard to listen to. Just bear with me.
Samuelson goes on as follows. The founding fathers are growling in their graves. The Senate is now debating campaign finance reform. A respectable sounding idea that's a fraud. Campaign reform would cure problems that don't exist with solutions that would restrict free speech, smother elections and bureaucratic rules, and hurt candidates' chances of beating incumbents. It's an odd way to celebrate the Constitution's 200th birthday. Blame that on Fred Wertheimer of Common Cause. This crusade for reform, campaign spending restrictions and public financing, is built on half-truths. He says that campaign contributions of special interests have corrupted politics. They haven't. The founding fathers knew that special interests were inevitable. Their government of checks and balances requires compromise.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there to fix a couple of things or just weigh in on what he's saying. So what he's saying is And by the way, that is the first time. I was right the first time I said that this is defeated. All right. But he says that the founding fathers are growling in their graves, okay? And that they knew all about special interests. They knew all about it. And that they made this design of checks and balances for that purpose. Well, there's some problems. The first and only thing that he said that was true is that, yes, the founding fathers are growling in their graves. But it's not because they're proposing campaign finance reform, which was an imperfect attempt to address the overabundance of rent-seeking and prolonged incumbency in the United States Senate and in elsewhere in Congress, in the U.S. House of Representatives as well. They are, growling in the grave because this isn't the system of checks and balances that they established. This is a result of the 17th Amendment, which McConnell, by the way, made sure he totally took advantage of. Because later in his career, he would use his power, his friends, and his influence to make sure that Kentucky is one of only a handful of red states where it is illegal to initiate a recall vote. So, with the 17th Amendment, the state legislature no longer has the power to recall, or at least that's in theory. I wish somebody would test that in a court of law. But they no longer have the power to appoint, certainly, because now of course, senators are elected directly by the population. And that nobody in no state has attempted to exercise their negative right, I guess, to recall a senator who's not doing well. The only mechanism we had to do that was, of course, the recall effort. And Kentucky doesn't have one because Mitch McConnell wanted to make sure that when he stabbed his voters in the back over and over again, that he would not be recalled for it. Now, there's only one way to survive if you're going to do that. If you're going to be a special interest whore, which he is a rent-seeking whore. If you're going to do that and constantly stab your voters in the back, then you need to make sure you have some means of surviving. Getting a ton of money from a ton of rich donors is a great way of doing it because Mitch McConnell never ran. And he was, look, you could call this somewhat of a genius. He never ran on his record. He never ran saying that he was a man of conservatism and kept his promises and, went on his business in the manner that he told you he would when he was running for office and campaigning for your vote. Never. Mitch McConnell's strategy of surviving as a U.S. Senator has long been and has always been to raise an ungodly amount of money, more than your opponent, and to paint your opponent as unacceptable. He's been outspent before. In 2014, he had to run against a pretty well-funded Democrat who tried to make herself out to be a moderate. Hell, even some polls had him in some trouble. He painted her as just way too left-wing, and she was for the state of Kentucky. But it doesn't mean he's the man for the job just because his opponent is clearly no better than him or would not be any more representative of their values than him. She would, in fact, be representative, just not of the values of the state of Kentucky. And he's arguing here, and he'll go on to make some comparisons. He'll cite actual examples, and he'll say, you know what? So-and-so was an incumbent, and he was defeated because the other guy raised $1.5 million more. I mean, now, folks, obviously the amounts of money we're talking about are obscene compared to the figures that he'll cite. But his case is you can win even if you're outspent by somebody with big donors. That's his case. It's a remarkable case to make if you're somebody whose entire strategy is to raise enough money to destroy your opponent. National mood. You can't factor for the national mood. Okay. We all now know that to be a total load of horse shit. If you have been following me for a long time, we have on more than one occasion gone down that entire road of academia, which looks at the initial justification for the 17th Amendment, but the actual real what was realized. And what was realized was an ungodly amount more of rent-seeking behavior towards senators they wanted to keep in D.C. so that they can pay less for more. He is a textbook example of that. He is a rent seeker's dream senator. And currency, of course, in Capitol Hill, in the Senate, in any legislature, but in Washington, D.C., it's a big deal. It's seniority. It doesn't matter if you're in the minority or you're in the majority. If you have a senior position, you'll decide what agendas your side picks up and runs with and which ones they don't. You'll decide what bills get tabled or what bills are advanced through committee and to the full floor for a vote. Seniority is currency. So if you're the rent seeker, you want them there as long as possible. And you want them to be a team player, a ball player. Because that's how you get committees. There are some people who were in D.C. for a long time, yet would get thrown off committees. Marjorie Taylor Greene got thrown off committee. Right? So, I mean, she's not exactly a senior congresswoman, or wasn't, but at the time. But doesn't matter. It's a great example. You touch the third rail, you get thrown off committee. All right? And it's already 2:37. It's incredible. All right, we don't have to go through the whole process with him, but keep all of what he just said in mind. And his argument is that it's not any easier to beat somebody if you have more money. Which is ridiculous. Of course, every election prognosticator, every election forecaster, everyone knows full well that while money isn't everything, it's huge. You can't even get name ID if you don't have money. And the more and more the limits, and not even the limits, but the more and more money became needed to be competitive, the worse that got. The more that problem was exacerbated. So now, it's not just about raising. I mean, some of the examples he used for the U.S. Senate, you crap. Like, he raised a million and a half, but his opponent raised 3.2. Whoa. We're now, of course, in tens and tens of millions. All right. And he said, as long as it's transparent. Well, that's really funny when you consider some of the groups out there who have taken, and I don't agree with all of them, but you know what? I'm going to show you a left-wing one right now. You can go to Open Secrets. You can go and dig through it. It is not as easy or as transparent as Mr. McConnell makes it out to believe. Southern Company gave McConnell Dark Money Group $1 million last year. And honestly, the loops they had to go with the levels they had to dig through to find where some of this money, and when did they go to Republicans? But it was through a group called One Nation, which McConnell ran, and it was filtered through all of these different layers. And there were other organizations and other corporations that did it as well. Some were easier to find, like Aflac, CVS, Nationwide. By the way, did they sound like conservative agenda items to you? Right? They did it as well. But this one group, Southern Company, was just thrown all through massive layers. Massive layers. $100 million into elections over the last 3 cycles for Republicans, funneled through McConnell's group, One Nation. Who he, of course, will then decide the sole arbiter of who gets what. So, of course, if you're him, you don't want any limits, caps, bureaucracy going over. I mean, honestly, folks, I got conflicted feelings over Citizens United. On the one hand, unions could not have a right carved out, which is ultimately an exercising of their free speech rights. They could not have one element of that free speech right carved out specifically for them to enjoy. If you're going to give it to unions, you have to give it to other entities. It's not right. But on the other hand, and you guys know this, I hate how much money is in politics. Think about what McConnell spent in the state of Maryland alone, right? A state that the NRSC, and of course he wasn't technically in charge anymore. Give me a break. Think the leader doesn't have a say in where the NRSC sends money on a state that they were never going to win. And even in some of these competitive states, how many homeless veterans could you remarkably, significantly improve their human condition? I hate it. I don't like it. And the only ones who stand to benefit from it are the ones who have the ability to dish that kind of money out. Unless, of course, and I know I should take a break, but you know what? We can, not a break, but in the meantime, I could play a video while I'm actually taking a break, but, oh, this is it. Oh, I did grab some. I grabbed the Vox interview of that case in North Carolina I was talking about. But we got to go before that. Because in an article that the New Yorker ran, okay, and I can pull it up here. I'm not buying a subscription to the New Yorker just to show you a clip when I can just easily pull this paragraph right here and show you. The title of the article is Why McConnell Dumped Trump. And it's February 1st, 2021. Supporting President Donald Trump broke into the Capitol, causing mayhem that led to the deaths of 5 Americans. The majority leader gave the most powerful speech of his life. This is a cold disavowal of Trump's false claims about rampant election fraud. The voters, the courts, and the states have all spoken. If we overrule them, it would damage our republic forever, he says, and calls it a ludicrous claim that there was rampant election fraud and that Trump really won the election. Now, this despite the article in Time magazine laying out for everybody what happened, which everyone knew. Because, of course, McConnell was telling donors who were pissed off that he would be perfectly fine making sure their money went to a good place if Joe Biden was the president, as long as Republicans kept the Senate. Everybody knows that to be true. Don't worry, your money's going to buy what you paid for, but we need to make sure we keep control of the Senate. Don't forget the context in the Georgia runoffs at this time. It was a big deal. He just lost them. He blamed Trump, even though they were calling Donald Trump and begging him to come back to Georgia because their polling showed that they were losing. Or their polling showed that Purdue was going to win, but Loeffler was going to lose. It was very tight, though, within the margin. Of course, our polling showed that they were both going to lose and that Loeffler was going to do worse slightly, and she did. But it's different story altogether when Mitch McConnell wants to keep control of that. He wants to be able to have that currency we were just talking about for his rent seekers, for his rent-seeking pimps. And that's what they are. They're his pimps. He sings an entirely different tune when it's his seniority at stake. Before we go and look at that case in North Carolina and his ability to affect legislation, before we go through that, let's take another trip down memory lane.
It's Election Day in Kentucky.
This is a very, very young Mitch McConnell. Buttressing. Let's call it that, right? Buttressing against the possibility that his party, maybe even him, he and his party don't do as well in elections. And all of a sudden, election fraud is a real problem. It's not only real, it's rampant. The very word you just heard in his speech, which the New Yorker quoted when he, quote, dumped Trump. They really did think, and I just want to say this real quick before we go forward, they really did think, the McConnells, the Ryans, that this was their opportunity after January 6th, this was their opportunity to not only destroy Trump. You saw the clip with Tucker. It's not enough to stop somebody or win in one thing. It's not enough for Mitch McConnell. He needs to destroy you and make sure you can't ever come back. He doesn't want you to be able to recoup. That's not who he is. And they thought they had that opportunity to do it to Donald Trump after January 6th. And by the way, the impeachment. They were trying to make sure he could never run for president again. All right, let's listen to him talking about election fraud back when he was younger.
And I suspect on this election day, as on many election days over the last 100 years or so, in some areas of my state, people are attempting to buy votes, sell votes, intimidate voters, and in general distort the election process. Earlier in my life, I taught on a part-time basis a course called American Political Parties and Elections.
What a fuck?
We talked about with the students the election fraud problems in some areas of this country. It is clearly not a problem everywhere. But in certain areas of our country, particularly rural one-party areas in the South, and in certain big cities in the Midwest and in the North, again, places where one party tends to dominate, this is an ongoing problem.
He's, of course, talking, guys, about Democrats. He's talking about Democrats. Back then, Democrats got the rural working class vote. So in his state, he didn't win elections by winning huge margins in rural Kentucky. He won them by winning battleground areas and suburbs. He would win, a small slice of the urban vote, of course, because that's all fraudulent. How can anybody not vote for Mitch McConnell? But they would win a decent amount in rural areas and then win suburbs, silk stocking Republican suburbs. That's how that was the party that he could put together as a Southern Republican when he was coming up. He couldn't win the Piedmont areas. He couldn't win the Appalachian areas. He didn't win that. Those were Democrats. And they'll be Democrats, by the way, until Donald Trump comes along, most of them. Yeah, the reddening shift of rural America started long before that, but not at this level. They performed decently, but there were these blue-collar areas, especially in the South. Think about Western, especially Southwestern Pennsylvania before the era of Trump. Al Gore won that. Mm-hmm. John Kerry won it. This is the Republican Party that he still represents. And when they lose, it's election fraud. It's always this way. It's unbelievable. In fact, Mitch McConnell, to those who know and knew him best, would tell you that election fraud in Democratic machine areas was one of his biggest driving issues. And now this is a guy who calls claims of election fraud ludicrous.
Of course. It
doesn't suit him. This guy is something to behold.
Some have even felt that it might have determined the outcome of the presidential election in 1960 between Nixon and Kennedy. There was much written and said about election fraud in Chicago that might well have turned Illinois in Kennedy's direction rather than in Nixon's. I might say I've had my own experience as an election challenger. I recall 20 years ago in 1967 in a governor's race in Kentucky, being dispatched as a challenger to a one-party precinct, being threatened with physical harm, watching voters being intimidated and pushed around. It's a problem that has persisted in my state. I can recall in 1981, Mr. President, when I was running for re-election for a local office, the polls showed me in a certain area of my community with 40% support. And on election day, it ended up being 17%. And I wondered what happened between the Friday before the election and the Tuesday of the election that made that much support just evaporate like that. And then in 1984, Mr. President, when I ran for the United States Senate, I recall being up literally all night, constructing telegrams, trying to get the cooperation of federal prosecutors to encourage people not to steal the election.
Sound familiar? Does it sound familiar?
I don't think they were up as late as we were, though.
Does that sound familiar at all? Because what is the difference between what he did and what Sean Parnell did or President Trump did?
Mm-hmm.
They were asking prosecutors to do their job because, of course, there is election fraud.
Yeah.
But it's not consistent or even coherent to say there's election fraud when you lose and when your friends lose.
But when you win,
But when you, yeah,
it's not.
or when somebody that you don't like Donald Trump, loses. And then he is attempting to use the same vehicles or the same remedies that you did. You call it a danger to democracy. You call it destabilizing.
Mm-hmm.
He said the courts, they all had their say. No, they didn't. When you were trying to get courts to have their say, you expected them to actually rule on the merit, right? Not rule that they didn't have any standing, like is what happened with Donald Trump. Oh, it's too late. The votes have already been cast. It's too late now. Because Donald Trump never had his day in court. Not once.
He's had a persecution.
He's at, well, except for those. But all of these people who claim that every court ruled against him, that's not true. They didn't rule at all on merits at all. And most of the other stuff, by the way, that people cite were actually groups that were not Donald Trump himself or his campaign. So we don't have to listen to too much more because, I mean, this is not just a very young Mitch McConnell. All right. Bear with me 1 second. Fast forward. And this is before the great glory of this one is this is before the 2020 election. All right. Here is what Mitch McConnell said. Mitch McConnell thinks North Carolina's election fraud scandal is a case for voter fraud. It isn't. All right. And then a subheadline, and I'm not a big fan of Vox, but again, this is Aaron Rupar, the biggest misleading scumbag on Twitter. Mr. Take out of context. All right. But it is still the case that Mitch McConnell said this. For years and years, every Republican who dared to call for common sense safeguards for Americans' ballots was demonized by Democrats and their allies. We were hit with left-wing talking points insisting that voter fraud wasn't real. You can't make this stuff up. And then, look, this is what Google thinks is worth putting on their index, by the way. Aaron then supports his reporting with his own tweet. This guy. I'm only interested in the quotes McConnell has to say. All right. Not that an incident of very real voter fraud has become now that an incident of very real voter fraud has become national news and the Republican candidate seems to have benefited. These long-standing Democratic talking points have been really quiet. Haven't heard much from the Democrats lately about how fraud really happens. And in this particular case, again, McConnell was right. What happened here at least was suspected voter fraud. But because, of course, it's Democrats who would have been the benefactors of this ruling, in this case, the judge did have the balls to suddenly say, you know what, I can make a ruling on the merits. There's enough evidence here of absentee voter fraud. I will order, a new election. Republicans went from winning the district in North Carolina by 500 votes during the election in question to winning the election by 5,000 votes. So they actually won by more. But that's not the point.
It was just in the opposite.
It's just not the point. It's like when it suits McConnell, he acknowledges it. This is McConnell still trying to survive during the era of Trump. This is McConnell still trying to pretend like he is an ally. This is McConnell who is trying to be, guys, some of you have heard this story before, but McConnell has never liked Trump. He has never liked Donald Trump. When Trump was first elected, back in Trump 1.0, meeting at the Mayflower, Paul Ryan's there, and they're there to discuss the Republican agenda, what it looks like, what kind of common items they could move forward, getting things done for the American people, what common ground do they share, and moving on. And if they're calling his immigration policies all sorts of names throughout the entire campaign before he won, right? Before Paul Ryan said he heard a voice and now I hear it too. Immigration was one of them. Yeah, we can secure the border, Mr. President. Absolutely. We understood what you meant. We got it. The minute he walked out of that room, Laura's standing over here, so I can't use the words, so she'll yell at me. But they called him a stupid and then proceeded to laugh at him for thinking that they were ever going to work on securing the border, that he was ever going to get a wall built. By the way, this is a party who ran on a wall in one shape or form. I mean, well, that's really what it comes down to. That's really what it comes down to. Their business is stringing you along. They can't really solve issues. Otherwise, they really have no purpose and they have nothing to run on. Rush Limbaugh was always right about that. And that's always why they hated Donald Trump. Because here comes a guy out of nowhere, fixing problems, causing voters to wonder, what the hell do we have any need of these people for? Why is it possible that a guy with no political experience whatsoever can come here and get things done that politicians have been promising to get done for decades, and yet they always have some sort of an excuse? I imagine the reason why they never do is because they're paid not to. Here's Mitch McConnell. Here's some contributions made to Mitch McConnell, and you're not going to recognize the names, but I'm going to tell you who they are and what they do. He said the amount of money doesn't matter as long as they're disclosed, and yet it's pretty difficult sometimes to find who gives not money directly to McConnell, but to some of his groups. And if you can go to the FEC and look it up, if you don't know who these people are or what they do, you're just going to look at it and be like, that's $1,000 here, $1,000 there. And you can go back, by the way, and look and see their employer. And this is why rent seekers hire so many lobbyists, so they can give them the contributions individually. All right. And if you didn't know them, you wouldn't know what these are for. All right. These are contributions right around the time Mitch McConnell had his change of heart on voter fraud, by the way. These are lobbyists for companies that push the use of electronic voting machines. Okay? So while Trump and Republicans are going on, we need paper ballots, and Mitch McConnell is now starting to have this epiphany that voter fraud, after how many years? Oh, gosh. How many years? We're in the year 2025. Let's take 5 years off of that and say it's 20. That video was 1987 was the first one. The next one was 93. So you're talking like 40, almost 40 years. This guy's going on and on about voter fraud. He gets thousands of dollars from electronic voting machines, and suddenly he doesn't approve of paper ballots anymore. Convenient. I mean, it's never what they say it is.
Well, it's never going to be.
So he cannot entertain concerns that some of these voting machines have issues and can be tampered with, because, of course, lobbyists have been giving him money to make sure that nobody does bring anything up about this. Because the last thing you need is some kind of federal amendment saying that voting machines need A, B, C, or X, Y, Z. And I'm going to tell you what it is that they really, really are afraid of. Open source. Open source, for those of you who don't know, have you ever built a website before? WordPress is an open source program. You can go and get the files for WordPress, download it on your server, your cPanel or whatever, and you can begin automatic. Maybe you got a pre-written theme or something, which will also be open source. And you could just go through the code, see what you want to do. There's easy ways to do it. But WordPress is open source. It is not proprietary anymore at all, and hasn't been for ever. I'm not sure it ever was proprietary. But the point being, it's not some secret sauce like a Wix, or like how are Wix running their templates, or even maybe Squarespace. But WordPress is open source and anyone can see it. It's not just the money that these companies make initially getting the contract and selling states or whomever those systems, the electronic machines, the scanners, the tabulators, the touchpads. It's not even that they make a ton of money on. It's that it's not open source, so they have to also sell you engine support from engineers, their engineers, and states pay a fortune for it. And apparently, lobbyists pay politicians a ton of money to make sure that they don't ever lose the right to do that. All right, so yeah, with that in mind, it's almost 3:00. I am gonna get off here in a second here. I mean, you're obviously waiting for me. All right, she is. All right, so there's that. But tomorrow's Freewheeling Friday. I mean, this is the McConnell legacy. I mean, he is now, I can't tell you how many people I know were like, not this time. He's not going to do this, Rich. He's not going to go out like this. And I am sure as hell sitting here right now telling you, I knew he was going to go out like this. This is who Mitch McConnell is. So he didn't, with these votes, he didn't put a nail in his legacy's coffin. Anyone who went over the McConnell career could come up with nothing but, a tainted legacy. A tainted legacy, which no amount of judges put on the bench is ever going to reverse. All right. So with that in mind, don't forget, sign up on Locals. We got this book club, and it is very important. We're reading Nations and Identities if you want to join and come to it. Huge. I mean, it really is so big for what we're doing. That's a totally different topic, but it is big. And I'm telling you, you're gonna love it. Somebody just brought up Montesquieu and Rousseau, and we were going over it. And I'm like, we just covered this in book club. It's relevant. All of the books we've picked, we've gotten kind of lucky that they're very prescient and relevant to what's going on and help you understand that stuff. So anyway, book club is for, you can be a member on YouTube too, but really, I'm trying, in case you haven't noticed, trying to really nudge you all over to Locals, which got a revamp and looks good, by the way. Guys should, if you're on Locals, guys, and you haven't tried it yet, go to the your settings, or really it's in a drop down thing, and it'll say to try the new user interface or UI. Check it out. I think it's cooler. I like it. So if you haven't done that yet, do it. All right, don't forget, if you like the videos, to like them, share them far and wide, and we'll be back for Freewheeling Friday tomorrow. Right. All right. So if you got any questions about the confirmations and some of the back stuff, we'll get into it. Maybe we'll leave a little bit of time too for the Tilla story, which I have not really fully gotten to tell, but looks like for now he got the message. We'll see if he remains. I guarantee you, give him another 2 to 4 years and he'll be the next Mitch McConnell. You think I'm kidding? All right. Yeah. So with that in mind, we're out. We'll see you tomorrow. All right. All the best. And as Laura likes to say, all right, guys, be good. Had to do something today. Take it easy, my foot. And take it easy. I don't know. Does you should have showed everybody.
Yeah.
Newsweek.
Locals only. When you do a Locals only show, and I don't look like Quasimodo anymore.
You never look like Quasimodo.